I mean, one of the things certainly, we had noticed with that area, if you think about it, it's like how many hectares, 20, 30,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. It's a massive site.
Massive. It's also a place where you only go there if you really want to go there.
Yeah, yeah.
The O2 would have brought you into it, but around it, it was a pretty desolate, empty. I mean, one person I'd say this is quite bleak. And part of the problem is that you're having to bring culture, creativity, design, this sense of a curated moment into a place that really has nothing there to offer apart from, recent infrastructure.
No, exactly. I actually, physically, I actually quite like that kind of exposed, the fact that it is a peninsula, so it's kind of not like London in lots of ways, and it feels very, I kind of like that. But anyway, that's more of a personal thing. So yeah, I mean that's just what I'm thinking about at the moment. We're working on at the moment is okay. You have the services in place, you have this wonderful architecture in place. We've got to get people there, and so it's talking about the community you'll create, and will that be enough of a draw, and the how much that kind of critical mass of people in one place will create something unique.
Do it, because it's interesting.
But also, I mean, transport links as well. I think it's actually, once people go, it's actually not that bad, because it's
once you get there. I mean, I thought it was curious when we started working on that and a fairly similar project. I realized as a business, a lot of our business was created around identifying where culture sat, on the edges or the extremes, and then tapping into that with the view of it's starting now and it's a minority taste or view, that over time this will grow and become like the big mainstream trend. And I think what you're almost being asked to do is the opposite. You're taking these things, planting those seeds, and hoping that those seeds will grow into something that gathers momentum but draws people into the area. So in some ways you do the opposite of what we do as a business.
But I think there are a couple of things. There's practically that I think there is, I always a bit cheesily call it this creative corridor on the overground line, going from Dalston and Shoreditch and down in Peckham and Crystal Palace. So you can kind of see this line of where a lot of young creatives are kind of living. And it's not that far from that. And I forgot the other point now. But yeah, so...
well, I think you've done there cleverly, which is what we tried to do as well. You've established, in some ways, I find a lot of businesses who do these things, they don't really, they may have an instinct about it, but the justification isn't always clear. And then when you talk with them, you say, look, don't you realize that you have this creative community?
Yeah.
There, you've got tap roots, coming from X, moving into Y. Creatives, as a rule, tend to like places that are awkward and difficult and unloved. That's kind of what happens when you move into the derelict warehouse, or you go to a bit of London that previously was where you went to buy drugs or rave parties or whatever. And I kind of feel that again, that the obvious part of your skills is not really readily appreciated, because a lot of it is your residual knowledge of what these things are, your background of what you have learned as an editor, as a writer, as a thinker, and then also the instincts you have about the creative community. And then all of that comes together in something like the design district in Peninsula Place.
Yeah, and obviously the job is to get away from that sniff of the contrived and the developer, kind of the cynical developer move and all that kind of stuff. So that's there, and so it's really that. In some ways, just talking about the place in a way that gets beyond that, and finding the ways of communicating what the possibilities of this place are that get that get around that. And also, at the moment, what's fascinating is the kind of COVID era shifts in what's required of a workplace, and the fact that creative businesses are the most kind of enamored of being physically in a place.
Yeah, that's that has become with us the big curiosity, because we're doing quite a lot of work. So looking, 20 years ahead, because a lot of developers have to plan that far ahead. And one of the big questions we're being asked at the moment is, what will the justification for going back to the office be? Because if you're in the creative industries, without a doubt, when you say it to people, instantly they say culture. That's what they bring up, and collaboration, and the physical nature the creative nature of being together generates. And when I'm chatting to people in the Accentures and banks, which we do a lot of work with, it's rare for them to bring that issue up straight away. You realize that their businesses almost exist, and I don't want to be rude about this, but devoid of the things that the creative industry sees as value and the core aspect of their being to Accenture or places that is seen almost like to be an add-on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Value.
And so it's accepting that, and then trying to build in some flexibility about how much do you need to be there all the time? Does everybody need to be there all the time, and all that, which were kind of trends are already going on anyway. I mean, I always thought that people could turn up in the morning and then leave in the afternoon. You have your. I
mean, if you're kind of looking at this as a bigger thing, because we're obviously celebrating our 20 years, and if I look at 2001. And looking up to 2020, some of the changes were visible. That push to flexi working, the re-emphasis of culture rather than commerce. People were thinking about, the culture city, the creative city, how design became a huge part of value or generating value for a city. And we kind of get that now. What kind of reflecting over what and what you're seeing now, what do you think will become the things we'll think about next to add value in the way that we now see, design or culture as adding, a key value to both a business, but a reason for going to it?
In terms of going to it. Well, I think there are two. I mean, the part of the reason why I was so interested in the design, I was just sick of people imagining the creative economy as basically people sitting on laptops in WeWork or similar, doing, I don't know what they were doing. I don't know, what they're doing, but there were people, and I think that is not the creative economy. The creative economy is a physical thing quite often. A lot of it is creative, and it was being squeezed out, and so it was really about reasserting the idea that creativity is not being squeezed into a co-working place and sat on a laptop, without it becoming this kind of cheesy, slightly reactionary craft artisan conversation. Do you know what I mean? And so, and that it embraced technology, which I think has been a big, design's been in a funny place, I think, in terms of product design and in this slightly reactionary place that talks about craft and artisanship and materiality, and kind of denies technology and rapid change. And so anyway, the design team was kind of trying to bring together these ideas that creativity was often something physical, was making, but it wasn't a kind of fuddy-duddy preservation task either. This was a kind of living, vital thing, and if you just provided the space for it, and gave it a bit of thought, you wouldn't be squeezed out to Margate or somewhere else, or kind of, God knows where, and it could become something that was visible without being visible, and kind of an inspiration without being a kind of showcase, a kind of cynical showcase.
But to make it front of mind, because I always think, if you talk to people about culture and design, the value they place on it is always really dependent on, their, for example, income.
Yeah.
And currently, the big, people are talking about, the value of the arts and, the role of design. And you see there is a massive gap, because it provided you with sustenance in a way that's inexplicable when you talk about, straightforward nutrition and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think the problem with design, because it's almost like an adjective, it's an emotional thing, it's a intangible thing. it tends to be put to one side during the moment of crisis. And yet probably more than anything, this is the time we need theatre, we need art, we need that designer's intervention.
Yeah.
And yet, because they're generally invisible, and because they're places like theatres and that, they're kind of, they're now dark boxes, there is that absence of conversation about the role of design and culture and the role that the positive value designers contribute to our lives, which is, again, something I've not really seen a big conversation about currently.
Well, weirdly, and this kind of slightly separates culture and performing arts from design, which are kind of two different things, right? But I mean, the conversation in design really in the last couple of years has really been about how, so the role of the design has expanded kind of greatly. So it's now involved with materials and processes and manufacturing and supply chains, and the other end, these kind of sustainability issues and post-consumer life and all that kind of stuff. But beyond that, there's been a kind of thinking that design thinking and the design process and the way you break down problems and look for solutions and iterate and reiterate and look for it is the way to tackle all kinds of things, beyond product design or experience design, think about social design and Alice Rawthorne and Paolo Antonelli from the Museum of Modern Art in New York are just doing an Instagram TV. It's a live series called Design Emergency, which is really about how design thinking tackles the climate crisis, how everything from how cities work, how infrastructure works, and the big fundamental problems. So in some ways, design has almost grabbed that kind of opportunity to say we are kind of a way of looking at everything. And the cool thing, there's so many complex arguments, I think, that have been heightened about what a city is and what a city is for, and they become very complicated. And
well, is it now? Because if you think about, we're in a huge, existential crisis about the car. So if you think about cities where, in some ways, built, unfortunately, became built around cars, not around people. So there was a sea change in how we created cities, and now suddenly, with the whole debate about cars, driverless, the whole issue we have about mobility anyway, and wanting cities more for people, that design yet is having to reinvent the notion of city. It's like even a simple thing I know was going through the city of London, that retail now sits on top of the city rather than on the ground, ground level. And even that psychological shift of how you redesign, Sky Gardens, bars, retail to sit on top. What does that mean to the street again?
Yeah. What's interesting now, going back to that design thinking point, in Hackney now, that they're obviously in the middle of this incredible experiment with just thinking about roads quickly, closing roads, closing access roads, putting all the traffic into the kind of main roads. But you can see it's a kind of very improvised response, right? So it's temporary.
Yeah.
They're trying things, which is classic design thinking. Let's try it. Let's see what people think. And then we'll go back and we'll try something else. And so rather than this kind of grand, master planning, which is what people have done in the past, or these, grand plans, we're going to do that, we're going to build that. It's like, okay, let's try this, let's try that, let's improvise, let's look at reuse.
That's going to remain, because COVID has really accelerated and kind of fueled a different way of looking at things. To that point, if you think about how we shut streets and, put more street furniture out, more plants. I mean, everybody seems to be getting plants now because the alternatives, it reminds you of healthier, safer, more kind of optimistic environments. So suddenly we have all of this thinking happening because of a context and a circumstance. Once that context is out of the way, do you think we will slip back, or will it give us, for the next 20 years, lessons we have learned that will make it easier to persuade both planners, councils, and the public that these streets should be kept this way, because now we've seen it. We go, wow, okay, this makes it. The phrase I hear everybody saying, oh, it feels more European. Ironically, given that we're about Europe, everybody's saying how European streets look. But is there a way that maybe it will just give people that? Because I always think designers have vision, and when they're sometimes describing something, the rest of us can't see it. Yeah. And now that we've seen what it means to have like a green street, a biophilic office, former fucking car parks turned into fantastic, eateries or roof gardens, we're going, wow, that's what design is about. Yeah. So how will we keep it, and what do you think will happen going forward?
It's interesting because part of me is very cynical about any talk of great resets, because I remember the financial crisis when, it was going to be capitalism 2.0 and blah, 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 and nothing really changed. I mean, some things changed, but so there's a kind of residual cynicism that we slip back into. But on the other hand, I do think there is a sense of urgency and a genuine sense of urgency that's not just, restricted to a very narrow part of the population or whatever. And the design comes into that sense of the design is about, we're here, we want to get there. These are all the bits along the path. Let's try this and go back, and let's try something else and go back and go back. And in some ways, the current tinkering with street plans and the kind of temporary, when you've seen them all, and they're happening all over the world, kind of makes that process very visible.
Yeah.
And kind of accessible, and people, which is a good thing. It's not this top down. Well, it is a top down imposition, but it's a more open. The mechanics are more openly or more visible of what the process is. We'll try this, we'll try that, and then we'll respond. If you hate it, we'll try something else.
So
it's kind of grabbing hold of that urgency and then trying to, I guess, take people along with you as you go.
To do it, because you have we've got the context, which is COVID. You have the urgency, which is, that if we don't, this can happen. There's also, I think, if you think about what's happening with our debate, as I said earlier, on cars, our understanding that, the neighborhood is being reinvented. We really want these kind of mixed use, blended, fairly kind of clean neighborhoods. So there's a conversation there. There's a bigger one about purpose, sustainability, which is one that we have been looking at quite radically over the past couple of months. And then you also have a generational shift, because suddenly those people coming in who are now reoccupying the cities, Gen Z, they're 22. Millennials are in their, late 30s. Who would have thought that would have happened? And all of those have a fairly more radical agenda about improving the, both community and life on the planet. And then suddenly these things have become center stage. So I just wonder, moving forward, because I'm just aware of our time together, last few minutes, what's your kind of thinking about, if we're looking at the next 20 years, what do you think would be the big profound changes that you would expect both to be, instant and long term? What do you think, or even what you would like to see? A hypothesis about what you would like to see.
Yeah, in terms of the city, I do think there were fundamental changes, because I think COVID has made us pause and think the idea that we all funnel into trains at 9 o'clock in the morning into a CBD and then get out at 6 o'clock and funnel. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And it's just was ridiculous. And it just allowed people to go, hang on, that's stupid.
And now we can see, the thing is, now we can see why it is, where previously there was that sort of lemming response where we did it because other people did it. But now we've seen this is what I mean about the visibility of alternatives. Until you see them, a designer or a futurist like ourselves, we describe them, but because people can't see them, you're always slightly having to create a bridge between what could be and what is. And now suddenly we see what is, and people are going, wow, this could be the way forward. Do you think businesses, like corporate businesses, will want to push things back because it doesn't suit them? They want to get people back to the office, back into work.
What always strikes me is and apparently the UK does lag behind Europe, and the rest of Europe has kind of gone back. So it's interesting to see what happens, whether I think in France and Spain and Italy, they're way, so maybe we're exaggerating. the degree to which people won't return to the office. But I like to think people will just think, hang on. There is, and also employers don't want to pay a ton of cash for an office they don't need. Well, I mean, that's crazy. So brute economics plays into it as well. But then going to the kind of shifting tack a bit, but it's interesting because I have a son who's about to turn 16 and
God, how did that happen, Nick?
I don't know. So I'm about to go 52. I'm 52, 51-year-old Gen X, and he's, classic 60-year-old Gen Z. And so I think what's fascinating, so he's kind of digitally native, I suppose you would say. But they're also, I think they're kind of woke native. And so there are lots of problems that people our age about identity and gender and sexuality and race that we think are really intractable and difficult. And, probably because we're just, guilt and all kinds of things, they're just getting on with it in a way. They navigate it far more easily, I think, than we give them credit for. And we problematize it in ways that they don't, because they're just like, okay.
Yeah, because I guess we're binary about it, and we like to have that, the positive and negative, and it's like the tick male, female, other, as the other gets us out of that sort of having to make a binary decision. And you realize, I was looking at recently, there are potentially 15, 20 others we could tick. Well, then somebody said, why bother having the first two? Why not just accept that the rest of it is easy and the first two are causing the problem, not the other way around?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, but did you have a question you wanted to ask us? Because I know that we were we always chatted about different things. Is there something you think, God, it's 20 years of these chaps banging on about the future? I'd like to know one question I've always been desperate to ask in the pub, and I never really got around to do it. We just got too drunk.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing, I think about a lot is the digital physical divide and the digital human divide, or alignment, or whatever. But really, so thinking about so much talk, and I do quite a lot about retail. I work with Wired on looking at retail and retail trends. But anyway, so the use of data and data analytics and predictive analytics and AI machine and algorithms, all this kind of stuff that we know about in terms of predictions of kind of consumer behavior and human behavior, really. You build a business that is kind of built on data, but also based on human insight. And
it was kind of mainly, I guess the original was, looking at what people were doing on the edge. So you're always looking at, and the reason I always thought it was interesting is you still had, even back in 2000, how long ago was that? You had data monitor, you had etc. So data was always present. And I think it's interesting the way people seem to have discovered the whole issue that sits around the ethics of data, but if you realize, at that point, it was surveys. You were looking at extracting value out of the market in terms of volumetric data, which was essentially asking people their views about either the past, because all surveys really could only survey the past, or their personal opinion. So you still ended up with a gap. And I go, at the moment, if I look at what's happening with predictive data or AI machine learning, it's still gathering data from the existing world, and it's fusing it together, and it's beginning to make some fairly good preemptive or predictive strikes. So the easiest, you look at Amazon, and you've bought this, it tells you what else you could look at. And do I really object to that? I don't. If I go onto my Waitrose and I'm buying my Waitrose shopping, and it leaves out all meat products because it knows I'm a vegan, do I object to that? Not really. So I think that what we've tried to do as a business is look at data in its positive ways, how it can be used positively. But we also, this is interesting, we did a trend which we call personal information economy. And pretty much nobody bought into it. It was one of those trends we looked at probably about 8, 10 years ago. And people go, we don't get it. It was all about data privacy, data lockers, how data would become valuable and transactionable, your personal data. And where maybe in the future you'd want a data bank that would manage your data and allow you to profit from it, but also strategically, and this is the bit that nobody really got at the time, it would make sure your data didn't slip into the wrong hands. It wouldn't go to like, you know, a Cambridge Analytica who would use it in a way it's been used. And I think what we're beginning to see, one thing is the awakening of understanding about data to the positive value of it. So if I give my data to the National Health Service and allow them to use it anonymously to identify genetic, you know, problems in the culture, is that a bad thing? I think not. If it allows, for example, an insurance company to pick up on all of the diseases they won't insure against because it's problematic and will cost them, then I might object to that. So what we begin to understand is the relative value of data. And I think the third bit is currently, and this is where I think we're actually building a third generation research system. We've created one, which we call FRS, which is Foresight Research System, that literally takes data from all of our previous research. You can plug client data into it, and then it will make some basic assumptions. But at the moment, it's very basic. What you have, which I think is a really great, it's human in the loop. Which essentially is people, which is what Facebook have, and every other business has it. And I think it's interesting that the instinctive role of the human is still necessary to make value judgments and to help you make selective judgments. And I think for the moment, that's pretty much how a lot of forecasting businesses work. You collect the data, you look at where it's pointing to, and then you kind of go a bit further in your head. You say, but what if this happened? How would that manifest? What's the potential if this, so let's say you're in scenario planning country. And what I always say to people is the big problem is you're not forecasting as such. You're looking at relative patterns and saying where it could go to, but a forecast isn't an inevitability. And I think this is where, with businesses, I say, so the forecast looks, for example, like this is going to happen. My question to you is do you want to positively participate in that shift? Or do you, as a business, have an alternative? And is your alternative better? And if that's the case, why not go for better? A simple example, we do a lot of work, as you do, with placemaking, construction, developers. The only industry that looks to the lowest minimum standard of delivery is developers. Every other business would look at, so what's the worst kind of phone we can make? Well, let's make the best one. But in development, and I say this to them, they go, oh my God, you're right. I said, so why is that the case? It's because there's a lack of ambition, there's a lack of innovation, there's a true lack of understanding that you could be the change, not the follower. And the problem is, in every industry, there are pilots and passengers, and you choose to be a passenger. And part of our business, I think, moving forward is as a forecaster to remind people that there are probably 600 potential futures. A lot of people will go one route, and that's fine. But is there a route you can choose that will suddenly be so drastically different that you become the Dyson? You become the Apple phone, you become the Airbnb of the hospitality, because you're not looking at it from the minimum you're setting. And I think, just the final point of that, I think designers, that's what great design does. It kind of sits there going, what if we did it this way, not that way? And because of that, it pushes the debate further and, a bit more into the future. And I always think, designers are like great bridge builders, but the great difference is they're not looking to have an end to the bridge. They're looking to build that span further out. And that's, I would think, with us as a business, that's what we tend to do. Is I know the clients want an answer, but I'm more curious about getting this thing so far into the future that you're looking back and you go, wow, how did I get out here? It's a bit dizzy, but actually, unless you do that, you can't help clients across that bridge. That's, I think, for the next 20 years, the plan is to help them across that bloody bridge.
Yeah, exactly. And it still feels like a lot of, the predictive analytics is actually an exercise in generating self-fulfilling prophecies and narrowing options rather than opening options up.
you're taking a filtered bubble and you're trying to make it reassuring. And I was thinking, you know, that data, it does become self-fulfilling, it does become controlling, it does become you know, both useful but also pejorative, in that it can prevent you from looking at the, you know, the alternative solutions. And I just feel that there needs to be a balance as to how you manage data, especially when you're trying to enter into, you know, what will make somebody happier, what will make somebody more emotionally engaged, what will make you feel that it's worth getting out of bed for. And I'm not sure the data in itself will necessarily give you that answer. I always think, you know, in every sentence there's an adjective and a fact. What makes the fact more palatable is the adjective, and what makes us understand the adjective as being powerful is the fact that there is a thing called the fact sitting in it. So I just think you need one or the other. I worry that we'll end up being quite factual at a time when adjectives are needed. You know, that's the thing. And I'm just now aware that we're out of time.
We are.
We are, sorry.